Chapter 36. Today was typical for Pentagon inhabitants. Kenji's office was already about 4 cups into its traditional total of 12. Between Sergeant Flume and Kenji, they drank their fair share, which was nothing compared to the over 30,000 cups drunk there every day. Sergeant Flume had never looked forward to a briefing more than today's. He certainly wasn't looking forward to reviewing the reports coming back from the missile strike last week that killed the Admiral's estranged wife. He knew they were getting divorced, but also knew the Admiral still loved her, so this was definitely going to be a touchy subject. Admiral Brinstock arrived at his normal time and entered through his normal door. The Defense Protective Service, the Pentagon's version of the Secret Service, had their customary station set up at the entrance, including metal detectors. As he approached, the personnel at the door recognized him, but they were to check the ID of each person, regardless of whether they recognized them. Several points were checked on the ID which hung around the neck of each person who entered. Not only would the picture and name be checked, but also the expiration date. The 2D barcode at the bottom of the ID badge would be scanned, and this would show not only a picture of the person on the computer screen, but it would also ratify their current authorization to enter the facility. It would show where they were stationed. About the only person allowed to enter the facility without ID would be the President himself, or the Secretary of Defense. After getting through security, Kenji walked down the hallways by himself. Everybody knew who he was, so he had to weather through all the greetings underlings gave. It's strange, he thought, how before today it never bothered me, but now they are all just meaningless fodder. He knew his new outlook was directly related to the way his life had changed since Judith's death. He had no other desire now than to kill terrorists, and to kill any who got in his way of killing terrorists. As every day marched by, the value of life meant less and less to him. There was a new coldness emanating from him. Most didn't know he and Judith had split. The vast majority felt this was normal for anybody who had just lost their life, especially under these circumstances. If they only knew. After about 5 minutes of walking through a few of the literally miles of corridors in this incredible building, he arrived at his desk. Sergeant Flume was just wrapping up his early morning duties and getting ready for the morning briefing. Where before there was the customary morning greeting exchange between the men, Kenji simply passed by Flume's desk and walked straight into his office with no words whatsoever. The sergeant thought this was strange until he remembered the Admiral had just lost Judith. He chalked it up to that. After 5 minutes, the customary time it took the Admiral to get his coffee together and check his email, the sergeant entered and took his customary seat. When Kenji asked, "So what do we have today, Larry?" without getting up from his desk, and without even looking away from his computer screen, Sergeant Flume got up from his place on the couch and sat in the chair on the other side of the desk. "Sir, there are 3 items on the agenda today. The first item may or may not be something you are willing to talk about now, sir. A memorandum came from the Secretary of Defense asking about the investigation into the missile strike on the Ptolemy." "I understand if you would rather not discuss that now, sir." This sentence made Kenji stop staring at his monitor and look Sergeant Flume directly in the eyes. "Sergeant," said Kenji, "I will not now, nor will I ever allow myself or anyone around me to pussyfoot around that subject. If you have something to say, then say it." There was an icy cold stare in Kenji's eyes that Sergeant Flume had never seen before. "Do I make myself clear?" With finely tuned military precision, the sergeant's reply was unmistakable. "Yes, sir." "Good. Get on with it," was Kenji's reply. "Yes, sir. Part of the memo was the Secretary's direction to obtain better intel on the activities of the faction who made the hacking attack. After that, there is your upcoming visit to Midway Magnetic, And finally, there was one refinement on a previous issue I brought to your attention. Did you forward the memo to me from the secretary? Asked Kenji. Yes, sir. You can find it to your right, on the corner of your desk. Kenji swung his chair and picked up the paper lying on the corner. It started out with the secretary tendering his condolences to the admiral. Then it said, in part, As you can imagine, the incident in the NATO exercises has brought into crisp focus the need for better intel. How did we miss this group rising up right under our noses? Was there any advance warning they were becoming a threat? Regardless of the answer, I am directing you to use whatever resources are at your disposal to counteract this type of attack in the future. I am aware that all existing drone technology is being retrofitted with encryption to make it unbreakable, but I want to know whether there is anything else out there rising without our knowledge. If you have to put undercover operatives in place, then do it. If you have to create an entirely new department whose sole direction is to find weak spots in our shields, then do it. Spare no expense, stop at nothing and no one to make this happen. For the good of our country now, and for the good of the country we are handing to our children, do whatever you have to make our citizens safe. The closing remarks struck a chord with a fledgling, newly psychotic persona who had taken root in Kenji. For the good of the country. For Judith. Larry, get in touch with my senior team. Tell them I want to meet at 1 p.m. sharp. Tell them it will most likely be a late meeting, and the subject will be counteracting this new brand of cyber terrorism used in the attack on on the NATO forces. The slip of his wife's name wasn't lost on the sergeant, but he wasn't going to let on. Yes, sir. Sergeant Flume wrote several things on his pad of paper, then continued on. Next, sir, there is the subject of your upcoming trip to Midway Magnetic. Have you decided on when you wish to go there for your inspection? Yes, replied Kenji. I'm going to be in meetings the rest of this week with the senior team on this memo from the Defense Secretary, so tell them I want to make my inspection this Saturday. For a second, Kenji thought about it while Sergeant Flume was writing. In fact, call them on the side phone right now. I want the schedule to be locked in before this meeting is over. Yes, sir. To his left was a phone sitting on a small table, allowing visitors to make calls while Kenji continued with other tasks. After dialing the phone number to the Midway Magnetic installation, Larry spoke with a receptionist and asked for the principal designer of technology, a man named Jason Marsalis, according to the info sheet on the Midway file. After a moment, Jason came onto the line. This is Jason Marsalis. Dr. Marsalis, this is Sergeant Lawrence Flume with Admiral Brinstock's office. Hello, Sergeant. What can I do for you today? Said Jason. Sir, the Admiral asked me to make arrangements for a visit and inspection of your facility this next Saturday. I would like to go over those plans and discuss with you an agenda for his visit. Next Saturday? Asked Jason. Yes, sir, next Saturday, the 15th, replied the sergeant. I'm sorry to tell you this, but that won't work for me, said Jason. I'm going to be out of town that weekend with my wife. Sir, I can understand your desire to be with family, but this wasn't put to me as a request. The Admiral won't be pleased with hearing anything other than you'll be there. Now listen here, Sergeant, replied Jason. You can tell the Admiral whatever you want, but the fact remains if the Admiral comes here next week, he will be alone with nobody to talk to. I'll be happy to make myself available any other time, but next weekend is a no-go. Sir, can you hold for a moment? Asked the sergeant. Sure, replied Jason. Take your time. Sergeant Flume put the call on hold and turned to Admiral Brinstock. With a bit of trepidation, he related the gist of Jason's reply. As he predicted, with the Admiral's state today, Sergeant Flume could actually see the Admiral's blood pressure rise. His face started to turn red, and the dark mood he was in today seemed to grow even darker. Transfer the call to my phone.
Now.
Without a word, Sergeant Flume did as requested.
Doctor?
Said Kenji. Yes, this is Dr. Marsalis, answered Jason.
Doctor, this is Admiral Brinstock.
Yes, Admiral, what can I do for you?
Son, I understand we have a scheduling problem for next weekend?
No problem, really. I just told your assistant next weekend wasn't possible since I'm going to be out of town with my wife. If it needs to be on the weekend, I would be happy to oblige the following weekend. However, any time after this weekend will be fine with me, responded Jason.
Doctor,
responded Kenji,
as my assistant said, I can sympathize with you for wanting to spend time with your family. However, this visit next weekend can't be changed. I require you to be present for the meetings and the inspection, since you are the best qualified person to answer the questions I will no doubt have during the inspection.
Admiral, responded Jason with a tone sounding more pointed than before, with all due respect, I regret to inform you I cannot and will not cancel anniversary plans with my wife next weekend. Whatever you have in mind for this coming weekend will just have to be changed because, while my involvement with the project dictates my being present for your inspection, my presence is not up for debate or negotiation. Hearing that this weekend was Jason's anniversary struck a small nerve with Kenji, making the recent events concerning Judith come to the forefront of his mind. This guy was doing what he should have done for his own wife. A part of him respected Dr. Marsalis, but that part was now weakly subservient to the much stronger part of him, which was a cold and brutal soldier.
Doctor, do you know who you are speaking to?
Admiral Kenneth Grant Brinstock. I definitely know who I am speaking to. An individual who would recognize that although you are in charge of this installation is all based on physics and science you know nothing about. Admiral, if you want to continue to benefit from such, and from the loyalties of each and every one of the personnel who work at this installation, you will see this is not simply a request, but in fact a reasonable requirement for which you need to stand down. Sergeant Flume could see Admiral Brinstock's eyes narrow. There was a palpable yet silent iciness emanating from his commanding officer, one he hadn't seen before. Larry hoped against hope this wouldn't be the new normal.
We'll see, Doctor,
was all Kenji could say. With all the force he could muster, Kenji slammed the receiver down. For a few seconds he continued to stare at the phone, fuming at one of the most blatant cases of insubordination he had ever come across. He knew Jason wasn't military, so there would be no disciplinary action like there would be if he were a Navy grunt. What really angered Kenji was he knew Dr. Marsalis was right. Kenji needed him, and he hated that Jason knew that. It wasn't something that sat well with Kenji at all. Somehow, Jason would have to be removed. For the good of the country, Kenji muttered under his breath. What was that, sir? Asked Sergeant Flume. Kenji looked up from the phone.
Nothing. Schedule the visit for the following weekend.
Yes, sir, said the sergeant. Kenji closed his eyes and willed his blood pressure to go down. This Marsalis grunt would have to be taken out of the way. Nothing and no one would get in his way. The Midway installation was far too critical for taking out the terrorist bastards who killed his... Sir, the next item has to do with a refinement on a previous issue brought up for consideration. Reorienting himself to the present, Kenji opened his eyes.
What issue was that?
Remember how I told you a reservist called in a report of an island in the Bermuda Triangle, supposedly full of dead aliens? Asked Sergeant Flume. Counter to the cold and dark mood Kenji had been in all morning, mention of that particularly ridiculous report ended up doing much to lighten things. Kenji slowly closed his eyes and started to chuckle under his breath, while reaching for his coffee cup.
I suppose they also found out Elvis was playing checkers with Jimmy Hoffa on that island too?
When there was no response from the sergeant, Kenji focused his eyes on him and saw he wasn't smiling. but had a rather serious look on his face.
"What?"
was all Kenji said. "Sir, you had better take a look at this," was Sergeant Flume's response. He walked over to the wall opposite Kenji's desk and turned on the flat screen. Among other things was a DVD player, but the flat screen also had a USB connection on the back allowing for a thumb drive to be inserted, exactly what Sergeant Flume proceeded to do. Within a few seconds, a video picture came into focus. "Sir, what you see here is a video log taken from that island. Apparently, the reservist has a friend who actually visited the island and took these videos. I can turn up the volume if you like, but I have had IT and cyber warfare analyze the files and video recording. According to them, the recordings are legit." As the video continued, Larry turned up the volume. The voice of a woman was describing all she was observing. At one point, she talked about how this race of beings was now all dead, and her decision to chronicle everything she could about this incredible civilization.
"Who is speaking?"
asked Kenji with dumbfounded curiosity. Larry looked at his notes. "It's an archaeologist working at the New York Museum of Natural History named Terry Lindstrom. She's the one who actually visited the island, sir, and has studied them enough to know their written language." The video progressed until Terry entered an apparent home. She talked about how all on the island were dead and, while she didn't make a practice of intruding in the last resting place of the inhabitants, she knew it was important to record at least one set of dead aliens. She carried the video camera through the home into the bedroom. There, on their version of a bed, were the unmistakable remnants of two bodies who had obviously died hundreds of years ago. Turning down the volume once again, Sergeant Flume continued. "Sir, apparently the report of this island isn't a flight of fancy from some crackpot. What is of even more concern is the reservist knows about the situation in Yellowstone, including details only known by this office."
"What?"
exclaimed Kenji.
"How in the hell did that information leak out?"
"The information didn't leak out, sir. There is a device on the island which not only revealed the existence of the problem, but, according to the reservist, has the ability to remedy the problem."
"Remedy the problem?"
asked Kenji incredulously. "Yes, sir. Apparently it is in need of repair, but if it can be fixed, then yes, it would remedy the problem in Yellowstone." Moments of silence passed between the two men as the screen continued to show more and more scenes from the island. Without a word, Kenji reached for the recently abused phone and pressed the intercom button. "Yes, sir?" said a bright and cheery voice on the other end.
"Stephanie, get in touch with Major Bellini and tell him I need to see him immediately."
"Right away, sir," was her professional reply.
"Turn that back up," said Kenji.
The screen showed a shot of what looked like a computer and an image on that screen of a person who looked normal enough, but somehow different. Hard to say exactly how, but he just was. Larry reached for the remote and turned up the volume. He could now be heard talking in a language that was not recognizable.
"Unbelievable,"
was all that Kenji could say. Sergeant Flume nodded in agreement. After a few minutes, there came 2 quick knocks on the door.
"Come,"
said Kenji loudly. The door opened, and in walked Major William Bellini. Sergeant Flume turned down the volume once again. Standing at attention and snapping to a sharp salute, Major Bellini curtly said,
"Reporting is ordered, sir." "At ease, Bill. You know my personal assistant, Sergeant Flume?" asked Kenji. "Yes, sir. We met when we were planning out the whole Nicaragua thing."
Bill reached out his hand to Larry and shook it, then came over to the desk and shook Kenji's hand.
"What can I do for you, Admiral?" "Bill, I have a really odd task for you," said Kenji. "Nothing can be as odd as the job in Nika," replied Bill, with a jocular tone to his voice. "Don't be so sure," replied Larry. Bill glanced over to Larry to acknowledge the response and saw the image on the screen, which had been paused again on the dead aliens. What the hell? That's why you've been asked to come here, Bill, responded Kenji. This is a video log of an island located in the Bahamas that is apparently filled with a race of dead aliens.
Turning back to look Kenji square in the eyes, Bill tried to see if he was now the brunt of a practical joke.
You're serious?
Asked Bill.
Very, replied Kenji. I want you to drop everything you're doing and go down there, along with the people who discovered the island, and verify their story. If it's true, then there might be technology which can help with a problem we have in Yellowstone. What's going on in Yellowstone? Asked Major Bellini. Bill, this is classified top secret right now, so this particular piece of information is not to leave this room.
Kenji then proceeded to explain what he knew about the situation in Yellowstone, and Sergeant Flume filled in several details on the USGS science reports.
You're telling me that we are on the verge of an ELE?
Asked Major Bellini.
That is exactly what I'm telling you,
came Kenji's reply. The thing is, Sergeant Flume injected, the women who went to the island already knew about it because apparently some tech there not only knows about it, once it is repaired, can fix the Yellowstone problem. Major Bellini, who by this time was perched on the front edge of his chair, now sat back and soaked in all that had just been dumped on him.
Whoa!
Turning to Sergeant Flume, Kenji said,
Larry, make whatever resources Bill needs put at his disposal.
Then turning to Major Bellini, he said,
Bill, I want a full report back on my desk in 7 days. I want to know if this is real and whether it can fix Yellowstone. Yes, sir.
Kenji stood, causing the other two to rise as well. Holding out his hand to Major Bellini, he said, I look forward to hearing what you find. The two men shook hands, and after also shaking hands with Sergeant Flume, Major Bellini left, closing the door behind him. Sitting back down at his desk, Kenji looked again at the flat screen where continuing images played.
How many recordings are there?
As far as I can tell, sir, there are approximately 27 hours of recordings, replied Sergeant Flume.
27?
Asked Kenji with surprise. Yes, sir, replied Larry. Unlike most of his military contemporaries, Kenji wasn't normally given to expletives. Today was an exception to that rule.
Hey, fellow Galimarians, this is Dan Adrian, and I just wanted to say thank you for listening to my book. If you can, please click like down below because it really helps me bring these videos to you and lets me know what you like. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe and click on the bell so that you'll get notified when I release more chapters. If you have any questions about this or any other of my books, or if you want to know more about what it takes to write a novel like this one, please make sure you leave your question in the comments below. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.